Okay. Hi, everyone. Now we're going to start with our impact of COVID on the startup and VC ecosystem panel. Just as a logistics announcement, we will be recording this session. And I'll now like to hand it over to Elena, our faculty member at Darden, to take over the panel.
Thank you so much for being here, and it's a great honor for me to moderate this distinguished panel. I'm going to start with introducing them, but before I dive into the panel, I'd like to set kind of the rules. I will see the conversation, but it would be great to hear your questions and what you are interested in, and we would greatly appreciate if you throw your questions into the chat that I will closely monitor, and then share your questions with our distinguished panelists. It would be great if whatever you hear, just follow up with other questions, and we'll take it from there. But I'd like to start by introducing our distinguished panelists. And first, I would like to introduce a person who is least related to Darden, but we would like to really welcome him, Vikram Gupta. He is a founder and managing partner of Ivy Capital Ventures. He has over 25 years of experience in private equity, business consulting, M&A, strategy, and operations across a wide range of industries. Prior to joining Ivy Capital, Vikram was the founding member at Ajay Piramal-sponsored $100 million healthcare-focused private equity fund that he conceptualized and raised in 2008. He has deep experience in investing and managing portfolio companies in the venture capital and private equity space. As I said, Vikram is the only panelist today who does not have deep Darden roots, but we welcome him here and we will convert him. He does have an MBA degree from Case Western, so it's a hire. So Virginia is a little bit warmer. Hopefully, he would agree to visit us more often. Our other panelist, Gunjan Shukla, is a seasoned finance leader and an active angel investor. Gunjan is CFO for OLX Autos and Emerging Market at OLX Group. Previously, he served as the CFO at PayPal and led domestic expansion of the payments giant in India. And prior to moving to India in 2017, Gunjan led finance teams at online lending pioneer Lending Club, which is very dear to me and interesting, and payments giant Visa in Silicon Valley. Engineer by background from IIT BHU, Gunjan made a transition to finance after his MBA degree from Darden in 2009. And our last panelist, last but not least, Himanshu Wardhan, who is also Darden 11 graduate. He is a managing director at Etsy India. Before Etsy, in his previous roles, Himanshu was head of operations at Craftsvilla in Mumbai, sales strategy and operation lead at HP based in Palo Alto, and a consultant with McKinsey in their US and India offices. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you so much for being here. And we're so excited due to the opportunity to learn from you about everything that is happening with the VC and entrepreneurship ecosystem in India. And I'd like to start by throwing a question to Vikram about maybe he can start a conversation talking about what new things does he see in the venture capital and entrepreneurship ecosystem in India.
Thank you, first of all, for having me here. It's a great honor to be speaking here. Thanks, Elena, for the kind introduction. I think India is really happening right now, and it's the kind of activity which is happening at this stage. It's amazing. Last year we hit just in the last year itself we crossed 40 new unicorns that were added to the equation. India has the third largest startup ecosystem in the world, also the third largest number of unicorns right now. I think COVID has definitely accelerated the growth of startups in India. In fact, it has accelerated the growth of a digital transformation. Any startups that were actually focused on technology or using tech in different sectors, they've actually grown multifold. As of current count, India has about 92 unicorns. And I think the unicorns are growing by the day. We at Ivy Cap currently manage about $425 million of assets under management. We have about 30 plus portfolio companies. We invest at Series A. we look at a very large number of startups. India has about 65,000 registered startups as per the Government of India statistics. And a large number of them are, about 25,000 of them are angel or seed funded. And I think the opportunity for investors like us is actually very attractive at this time. And we believe that it's the right time to be an entrepreneur in India. So quite excited about where we are at this stage, and looking forward to really growing with this ecosystem. So so very happy to be here.
So you mentioned a huge technological change. So Dungeon was your kind of fintech experience in the US and now experience in India. What changes do you see in that digitalization of the various industries?
Yeah, and again, thanks for having me, Elena and folks, and great to join this panel as well. As Vikram said, like COVID was a transformative year for India, right? So if I look at fintech, there were probably 3 inflection points in India's journey. The first I would say was, we call it like Jio. So Jio is a mobile provider or telecom provider in India that basically made internet access free in many cases, right? Or basically provided smartphones in the hands of millions of Indians. This happened in, call it like 2015 or 14 to 16 era. And then the next inflection point was demonetization. This is when the Indian currency was demonetized, a new currency was brought in place, or money was brought in place. So the first inflection point was important because, like, a lot of smartphones now were in the hands of Indians, and now they could digitally access or digitally move money from one place to another. Second was because the money was not in circulation, so a lot of people had to move from offline to online. And COVID, in my opinion, is again the third inflection point, sort of like the fintech journey of India. Because as you can imagine, when people were in lockdown, people could not go out to buy goods or exchange services. A lot of people moved from offline to online, right? So this was a huge inflection point, not just for payments, but for a lot of other subsectors, as you see in fintech. So I generally divide fintech into, call it like 4 subsectors. One is payments, and I'm going to predominantly talk about mobile payments in this case because India is mobile first. Second is insurtech, right, or insurance, right? I mean, you want to move money, then you want to protect your assets, you want to borrow money, so there is lending, and then of course you want to invest and you want to make money, so there is wealth tech. And mobile payments has been hot in India because of the 2 inflection points I spoke about. But then this took another jump because of COVID, because what I saw being in the industry was that after demonetization, mobile payments took off, but a lot of it was P2P, me sending money to Vikram or me sending money to Himanshu, but a lot of merchants or businesses were still dealing in a lot of cash. But COVID forced a lot of them to be able to accept digital payments because there was no other way, right? And because of health reasons, safety reasons, people didn't want to exchange money. So because of that, I think we saw a huge jump in what we call P2M, person to merchant payments, mobile payments, during last 12 to 18 months or so. InsurTech was another segment where I think it's going to, because people were in their homes, because they got to experience that the digital experience on buying insurance, using an insurance is as good as offline experiences with their insurance providers. I think that's a sector which also saw a boom. I think it's going to grow 2x in next 2 years or so if you believe some studies. And then lending, a lot has been spoken about lending in India. It's still a nascent segment. It took a hit, as you would imagine, during COVID, because there were delinquencies and there were other reasons as well. But again, because a lot of transactions have become digital, we have a lot more data on people with which we can underwrite them or even underwrite businesses. So I think you will again see further spurt, or we are seeing a spurt in digital lending in India as well. And lastly, wealth tech is pretty interesting. I mean, as a country of more than a billion or whatever, 1.3 billion people, we still have only 3 million investors overall, right? So what COVID did was people had a lot of time on their hands. And what you also saw in the last, call it like 15 months or so, was the markets were also going up. So people saw also that there was an opportunity to make money. I think combine these two factors, and we saw like we are seeing, at least with younger investors, a surge of people who want to use digital wealth tech solutions to manage their wealth. And I think that's one of the biggest booming sectors as well. And one of the sectors that I've invested in personally as well in a couple of companies, because not just in the tier 1 cities where I was saying young people want to invest, I see this, but even in tier 2 cities, you're seeing younger people or even people in 30 to 45 age groups are now becoming more and more aware about, like, you can just use a phone and invest in stocks or in these markets, or like why it's important for your financial well-being as well. So I think that's another sector that we're going to see a huge growth in next, in the years to come. So that's a little bit about fintech, and in terms of what other segments are growing. I think, as you would say, obvious thing is consumption. As Vikram was also saying, everything is getting digitalized. So everything that you consume, whether it's in terms of goods or services, all the business models around it are getting digitalized, right? So grocery deliveries took a jump, whether it's like, any other services around people who are fixing, plumbing for you, electricity for you, all of those were used through like marketplaces and platform, or booked through marketplaces and platforms. So all those experiences have moved on digital platforms. And lastly, there are some blue ocean areas that are coming up also. So wellness is now extremely important to everybody. And while people were, a certain segment of people were always focused on their health. Like if there was something that people learned from COVID was to take care of themselves. So you're seeing a lot of action in health tech, but also, very specific areas like mental health, well-being, and all of that. So you're seeing very interesting startups and sub-segments emerging over there as well. And of course, going back to my previous point, people have time. So you also see gaming and entertainment and those segments also taking a surge. So that's something that we have seen so far.
Vikram, was your experience in healthcare related investing? What do you see? What shifts and changes do you see in opportunities in that sector? Just as an extension of Gunjan's wellness related conversation, though gaming, I would not put the two next to each other, but
yeah, actually the healthcare in India is something which is very different from that in the US. The healthcare insurance actually penetration has started very recently, and it's still a long way to go, and I think COVID has accelerated growth in the sector across different dimensions, whether it is healthcare insurance or telemedicine, and various other things. Of course, initially, the initial period of COVID, the hospitalization increased substantially, but this were all COVID-related cases. But I think hospitals actually haven't made profits in that sense, because their beds were utilized more for COVID-related patients. They were not doing any elective surgeries or other things that is more revenue generating for them. But at the same time, we saw a surge in the health tech companies. They're focusing on patient interactions and anything to do with the patient data that can be used for various things, including improving in-patient diagnostics, or even at the doctor's clinic, helping doctors become more digitized. And I think prior to COVID, doctors were resisting to using technology. And what we've seen is that during COVID, they've actually become experts now in using technology. So we've seen lots of new applications, practice softwares, coming up. We've also seen lots of new tools being used, not just the hardware or software tools, but also hardware tools. And that has got accelerated within the hospitals or clinics. And I think new business models are emerging now, as we are seeing. With the government of India, for example, launched this entire platform for registering the vaccinations records, which was then offered as a platform to various other technology providers who use this as a base platform to develop further models over and above. So I think this whole digitization has actually helped a lot. And over and above, 2 years when the government came up with their budget, they actually really put a lot of focus on ensuring the rural population, which was earlier missing in the country. So now a large majority of the country is actually insured, which is actually a very positive change. So I think all these things are offering newer opportunities, for early stage startups in this country.
So Gunjan was mentioning about how technology propagates through a variety of segments like grocery deliveries. India is also well known to be a country of small businesses and micro entrepreneurs. Now, Himanshu, I was hoping you can, through your experience with Etsy that connects with these people, what changes do you see happening in that sector of the economy over the last 2 years?
Thanks for having me here. Great to be part of this discussion. So I think obviously big startup, big money, VC funding makes a lot of news, but then there's an undercurrent of small businesses and entrepreneurship that has really been enabled by these tech businesses, maybe startups or or other established companies, that have really helped to actually get a lot of small businesses that were predominantly brick and mortar to adopt technology and actually expand their market much beyond their immediate vicinity, and with a much lower initial cost of startup. So we at Etsy, obviously a platform for creative entrepreneurs, for people who are making products. So with this platform, creators who were selling through small boutiques or small creative setups only, they had this opportunity to now reach out to buyers across the world. So obviously Etsy is one example in e-commerce space in lifestyle category, but then there are a lot of other examples in food aggregators. Suddenly there are a lot of people who are starting cloud kitchens with very small amount of investment and becoming food tech entrepreneurs or food entrepreneurs by starting these businesses, or even as as basic as cab aggregator business. It again mobilized a lot of people to become self-employed and start their own small independent businesses. And COVID definitely accelerated a lot of that adoption. When we started to onboard a lot of creative sellers, a lot of urban people were, they were very savvy about the idea, and urban sellers would come and set up shops. But a lot of people who have been doing business the traditional way, there was a lot of inertia around it. COVID made them, a large number of people, realized after COVID that when things got disrupted on offline, that they needed to be online. That was not a choice, but that's really important for their survival as a business and for self-sustenance as a business. So I think that technology adoption really sort of helped to accelerate the adoption by at least 3-4 years. And based on that, in 2 years, We've now seen hundreds and thousands of sellers to be selling on Etsy, 4 million product listings. We are one of the largest e-commerce exporters out of India, with very, very small artisans. And I think they are really the story to be celebrated and to be talked more about in the entrepreneurship wave, is because they are, it's kind of an alternate way of economic sustenance that the ecosystem has been able to create with this tech enablement and adoption.
You all three of you are so positive about the country and opportunities it presents from the entrepreneurship perspective and new startups. Yet we all know that we need money to raise even grassroots companies into something that will make a difference in a society, in a country, in the global economy. So are there any structural shifts in the flow of funds that support all this kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem and micro entrepreneurs ecosystem? So I'll probably go to Vikram first as kind of a professional investor on the panel.
So one very important change which you've seen over the last 5 years, which have happened in India, is what the government has done in terms of very focused initiatives on startups. So they've launched a campaign called Startup India, Stand Up India in 2016. And then post that, they started coming up with lots of policy initiatives to help startups. If you're a registered startup with the government, you get some tax incentives and lots of other things. And then the government also allocated funds through various fund of funds initiatives. In fact, the domestic pools of capital in India were almost non-existent, almost about 7 to 8 years back. And I think in the last 2 years itself, we've seen substantial domestic pools of capital building up, whether it is in the government or in the corporates or in the family offices, HNIs. Plus, in a very structured fashion, we've seen lots of angel networks building up. So every city in India has its own angel network. So, and these are very organized. Anybody who has small pools of capital are just pooling that together and just forming their own angel networks. And if you just look at the last 2 to 3 years, I think almost about 300 to 400 new venture capital funds registered with the regulators and raising capital in the market. If you look at just the last year, I think almost about $61 billion was invested in the startup ecosystem in India. So I think these are all very interesting changes which are happening. So things are becoming more and more organized. And in fact, from the time when we started investing from our Fund 1, which was in 2013 to 15, our Series A rounds used to be somewhere around $2 to $3 million. So that's what we used to call Series A rounds. These days, we're looking at, Series A rounds at $30 million, $40 million, $50 million kind of, people calling them Series A rounds, which is very interesting. And seed rounds are in the range of $2 to $5 million. Even though the average Series A round would still be around $10 to $15 million, but we've seen larger Series A rounds as well, given the nature of business models that are emerging. So these are very interesting changes happening in the country. And, of course, it also brings challenges with it, because when you have so many funds in the market, while it's good for the entrepreneurs, there's a lot of options available. It also creates, a little bit of deployment pressure on funds, and therefore puts pressure on the valuations. And, especially in the last 1 year, we've seen the valuations go up quite substantially in certain sectors, especially in consumer tech. We couldn't see how they were even justified. So one has to be very, very careful and selective if you're investing. You have to resist this temptation of, the entire effect of the FOMO, where people are just putting money just without asking questions, just so that they don't miss out on the value creation. we've stayed away from that kind of temptation so far because we're very selective investors. And I think as long as you choose your assets right, you'll create tremendous value being investors in this market.
Gunjan, as an angel investor, what do you have to add to, do you see similar changes?
No, I think Vikram, as Vikram correctly called out, there is now number of angel platforms that you see across India in the last 4 to 5 years. I'm on a couple of platforms. I personally invest, but I also invest on a couple of platforms, and you have like 1,000+ investors on some of these platforms, right? And structurally, what has happened is like people have become more comfortable in putting money in startups. What that has also made happen is the seed rounds in India at this level, like I think at this number of companies which are getting seed rounds was unheard of a few years ago. But now, because you also have many angel investors who are ready to put small checks, but there are a lot of people who are ready to take some risk along with entrepreneurs. You're seeing a lot more seed funding for companies. And with all the action that we've been seeing in the startup world, you're actually seeing a lot of like folks who have gotten exits from their companies or employees who have worked at successful startups who are also investing in the ecosystem and further propelling it. So as Vikram said, like there are a lot of really interesting things happening. Really, like, I mean, gone are the days when you used to see angel investors who were like, you made your money on either Wall Street or you were a very successful professional, and after you turn 45, 50 or so, you start investing in this asset class. You see angel investors as young as like 26, 27, because they really believe in investing in these, some of them because, yes, this is an asset class, some of this because they're passionate about making a change. And that is really game-changing, in my opinion, for the ecosystem.
So, Gunjan, I found it interesting that Vikram started with the importance of the government support and government initiatives that dedicate resources to fostering the entrepreneurial ecosystem. You are in the finance industry, excuse me. I talk extensively about fintech at the start. Finance industry is probably, I don't want to say the most regulated, but one of the most regulated industries, no matter which country you go to. So how can you characterize the government actions as pertaining the entrepreneurial ecosystem in fintech specifically over last 2 COVID years?
Yeah, I think a couple of things Vikram already called out about, like how the government is trying to propel the overall startup ecosystem. In fintech, again, like, government has done a lot of things, especially in the payment sector, which really propel the overall journey of digital and mobile payments in India. So there is, a government, call it like the government-funded organization called NPCI, and that creates financial products or payment products in India, which are leveraged by the banks, which are leveraged by the fintech companies, which are leveraged by other financial services ecosystem players as well. And that's pretty unique. It's like, I don't see other governments or not so many governments or other entities which have done so. So to give you an idea, they launched UPI, which is basically call it a peer-to-peer or from bank account to bank account transfer that provides a bank account to bank account money transfer service or transaction service real time, which was not even available in US, right? So this was something that was created by a government-funded entity. And a lot of that was to propel this digital ecosystem in India. And similarly, there are a lot of other initiatives, like whether it's on startup, Make in Bharat and other initiatives where government is really helping not just fund the startups, but also to make the ecosystem better for them. So that whether it's, it's about getting licenses, whether it's about operating in multiple states, paying taxes in India, service taxes in India used to be a huge issue because every state had its own tax. With GST, like there is a single regulation or at least a single tax structure, which makes it very easy for a business to operate across multiple states. So along with this, I think there are some really good initiatives. I'll be very candid to say, like, there are pros and cons of these things too, because when the government gets really into an ecosystem, then also, it sometimes reduces the incentives for other ecosystem players to make it more efficient. But so far, I think if you look at from the greater good perspective, there is a lot of good that has come out of the government of India and its initiatives.
I see. So both Vikram and Gunjan discussed the size of the deals. I think up to $2-3 million in Series A. This is quite a big of money, which suggests this is not really small business financing or micro entrepreneurship financing. And Himanshu, sorry, I keep coming back to you for this segment of the market to tell us more about it, because I think it's super important in the economy. So can you share with us what actually funds the growth of micro? Is it self-funding for micro entrepreneurs? Is it fintech platforms are helping there? And whether the government shows any support for developing this side of the economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of all of these. I think a large part of the sort of ecosystem or these sort of micro entrepreneurs are self-funded, starting from the small amount of capital from savings. And I think the traditional banks have, I think, have also played a very, very important role. Government definitely has, in last few years, with the Startup India scheme and sort of surrounding ecosystem around it, have also provided a lot of sort of these support programs, started with SIDBI, small business lending programs. For international export, there have been a lot of these loan programs and funding programs to support small businesses to kind of sell to world, actually, not just in India. And I think more recently now, definitely with the whole tech ecosystem, whether it's the aggregator platforms or fintech companies, they've started to play a very active role in also supporting these small businesses to get started with. So I don't think it's one single thing. I think it's been a very, very good combination of all of them. But as most of these people still have those banking relationships with their traditional banks, and the accessibility tends to be sort of more with this traditional banks and government programs. So large percentage are still going through the traditional banking channels, but the share of fintech companies increasing over a period of time.
So I see a lot of really interesting questions from the audience. I'd like to start with one that I'm going to exercise my dictatorial muscle and pick ones that I like. But all three of you had exposure to the startup ecosystem in the US and innovation in the US and in India. How would you characterize the differences structurally so that we can relate the market in India? Would like to go first? Gunjan is unmuted, so I'm going to go to him immediately.
Sorry. Structurally, I think honestly, like a lot of the differences have been blurred in last few years or so, if I may say. I still do think, I think there is one question on talent as well, and that's where I still feel like US still has an edge when it comes to talent. And just the availability of talent that it has available in some pools like Silicon Valley and some other ecosystem as well. I think in India, that talent is still developing. In my opinion, just because of the sheer cycles of innovation and the maturity of the startup ecosystem, I think there is a very solid ecosystem of like how you get a certain kind of talent, people who have built companies, people who have built, who have seen things going from 0 to 1 to 10 to 100 and 1,000. So you'll find a lot of those people in Silicon Valley and US versus I think just that level of talent and maturity is developing in India. But if you ask from my vantage point, I think, I think we are at pretty much level playing field when it comes to the startup ecosystem. Structurally, again, just in terms of the infrastructure and the regulations and what the government provides for our startups and how it makes it easy for them to operate, there might be differences, but I think those are being blurred by like how innovative and the creative startups have been in India as well. So structurally, besides the infrastructure and just the maturity of talent, not much. That would be my perspective.
Would you find the lack of the immaturity of talent beneficial for the Indian economy or detrimental for the VC startup ecosystem? It's immature people, they're believers, they're more likely to innovate.
It's not immature. Let me characterize that. It's not immature. Seasoned is probably a better word, right? In some cases.
Okay.
But I think in some cases that's good actually, Elena, right? Because the problems in India are very different to solve versus, problems in US or, these problems need different kind of solutions versus somebody who just came from Silicon Valley and said like, hey, I've digitized the restaurant, so let me go and try the same thing in India as well. So maybe it's good for India, but sorry, go ahead, Elena.
No, I just wanted to add that this is actually widely discussed in academia. This is what we label the colonial view of the problems. I've spent time in the US, I come to emerging markets and I want to solve those problems using, when you have a hammer, every problem is a nail. And that's where the grassroots entrepreneurship that are local and embedded in the local community, I see Himanshu nodding. Yeah. It becomes really, really, really important.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because
I just want to add to this. I think. Go ahead. Go ahead. No, I was saying that the US and the India markets, there are some fundamental differences, right? So the amount of risk capital that is available at early stages in the US is much higher than what it is in India. In fact, I believe that the universities in the US, they've thrived with this entire endowment ecosystem. In fact, if you rank the US universities in the order of the size of their endowments, the 100th rank will be $1.2 billion of the endowment size. While India, we've just started India's first endowment fund at IIT Delhi in 2019. So the capital which is available, which is coming through as a collective pool of various alumni, and part of that can be used for risk capital, whether it's for innovation or entrepreneurship, is a very recent phenomenon in India. So it started happening, but I think it hadn't happened so far. And even the government funding, it has started happening in the US long time back, and it's just started happening in India now. But I think the timing of this is good. I think in the global system, if you see, we're talking about 1,000 unicorns. I think 50% of them are still in the US. India has just about 92, which is about 9% of the global unicorns. China is the second largest in terms of number of unicorns, but India has added more unicorns than China just last year. So India's actually growth rates are actually now higher as compared to the comparable countries. But I think from a talent perspective, if you look at, clearly there are differences in terms of the sectors, right? So when we look at the B2B, SaaS, enterprise, tech, product-based companies, there is a lot of talent in India, engineering, technology talent in India, but India doesn't offer a very good market for such businesses. US is the market. So, Indian businesses, Indian entrepreneurs, highly technology oriented, they start in India, but then they have to go to the US to look for the customer base. Either they move to the US or they set up their base in the US. In fact, almost every B2B SaaS company that we've invested in, whether it is focused on drug discovery AI or conversational platforms or e-commerce platforms, they all actually doing very well in the US. We also had another startup in India, which actually was in the dental lab industry. So, which was actually set up in India with the objective to acquire dental labs in the US. So what they did, they knew that this industry is highly fragmented, a $10 billion industry with the largest dental labs, 500 million, the 10th largest, just about 30 million. These guys started, just with the idea, we just put in $4 million in them. They grew to $45 million size in no time with $8 million EBITDA, just acquiring a few dental labs across different parts of the US, in New York, in Florida, in California. And then we sold the company to a US private equity buyer at a very good price. So I think there are businesses which actually cross-leverage India-US advantage, setting up in India with Indian resources, but targeting the US markets. And that opportunity will continue.
That is amazing to hear how, because we typically hear the opposite direction of acquisitions. This is just amazing to hear this type of stories. Himanshu, would going back to the local talent, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I think I want to actually talk about the whole evolution of how, when I moved to India in 2015, the evolution, what I used to hear, and that investments were in X of India, so Uber of India, HC of India. So there, all the investments there had to be a Western validation, or at least most of the investments for meaningful investment were attracted by some version, Indian version of an international sort of startup. I think in last 2-3 years, I've started to see a lot more sort of India-specific solutions getting funded, which is really great. I mean, when I joined in 2015, when I moved back to India, I joined a startup which was HC of India, and there were 10 HCs of India that have been funded. And now, at least, I think, I mean, it's still there. So to your point around, validation that has to be provided by West, I think it still happens. But there are a lot of business models that are solving the sort of the local needs. I think in terms of talent, it's really interesting. I think some of the Vikram also talked about the tech talent is a global talent now. So it doesn't matter where you are based, especially after COVID. The location has sort of lost relevance. But from a non-tech talent point of view, I think there's still there's those very, very interesting dynamics. I feel that actually in some industries, it's easier to start a business in India than in the US, more not from a capital point of view, but more from the point of view of availability of resources and availability of sort of pool of labor or workforce that you can hire to kind of build a business. So I think I actually believe that India is still one of the sort of most interesting and best places to actually bootstrap businesses, because the startup cost or the initial investment or your personal cost of living is also much lower. So it's kind of also easy to sort of get started in that ecosystem if you're not looking for large amounts of investment.
Manshi, you talked about startups that are very India specific. In the spirit of Darden cold calling, give us a cool example.
So let me think. Sort of my favorite. I think there's an interesting startup. I don't know them very well, but it's a lot in the agri-tech space I've been seeing. So I saw this. One of the startups that I've been tracking, Animal, which is basically an Instagram for cows. Which is really, really an interesting thing, which is basically it's a marketplace for buying and selling of cows, and cattle sort of trading is a very, very interesting, and it's a very large rural market. I think that's something that got me really, really excited about. I think that's just incredible. They're kind of, and I think they recently raised about $25-30 million odd in Series B funding.
Wow. Kunjan, what is the company that we should follow, in your opinion, in India?
Yeah, I'm going to pick one from my portfolio. So it's called Simply, and it's about micro savings for folks in tier 2+ towns, or folks who can actually probably invest like $1 or $2 a month. And it's really about like creating the culture of investments in the community where you did not see that before. So I'm really bullish on them, and I really want them to grow big. And I think they've got great potential. So look out for them.
Vikram?
So yeah, in fact, there are quite a few companies in our portfolio which we believe are becoming market leaders in their respective areas, but I think I'll just maybe name one or two. Miko, which is actually a companion robot for kids. Amazing hardware and software combination. It's like Alexa with a robot, which is like a toy which talks to the kid, provides emotional intelligence support, a lot of knowledge base. It understands the tone of the language, understands your moods, and 60% of the revenues actually come from the US markets. It's an Indian product which actually sold substantially in the US markets. Disney made their first investment in Southeast Asia in Miko recently. So quite excited about it. The company is already scaled up now after investment quite substantially. So something which we believe will probably become quite large. Another one I think which is more specific to the Indian markets and something very interesting. When we looked at this company, it's just selling a specific food category called biryani, which is people didn't think that one can create $1 billion business by just selling biryani on the platform. So we invested in this company very early on, and they just closed another $70 million round, and becoming, I think, headed very clearly to become a unicorn just by selling biryani. So it's called Biryani by Kilo. That's the name of the company. So these are two examples, but of course, there are quite a few other interesting examples as well that can be quoted.
So going back to the very high level perspective, in the US, we've seen a significant change in the investing industry over last, I'd say, 5 years, with the rise of the Me Too movements and Black Lives Matter. We see more and more investment vehicles and funds, from venture capital to private equity to ETFs to mutual funds, that are dedicated towards providing capital to female entrepreneurs or female CEOs or African Americans, trying to create more, to be more inclusive and create more diversity in the entrepreneur pool. Do you see changes happening in India? Are investors investing in entrepreneurs coming from, and I'm going to quote one of our attendees, backward caste?
We are seeing quite a few funds now coming with thematic funds. We just saw a fund which is only focused on women entrepreneurs, for example. I saw a fund which was focused on a specific category of the caste and people, to bring them up, to bring more diversity in that section. But I think we as a fund ourselves, have started integrating the SDG framework, the Sustainable Development Goals framework, into our investing philosophy. And gender equality is one of our core objectives. It's not just looking for women entrepreneurs, it's also the companies that we invest in. We look for how many women employees they're recruiting, and do they bring other diversity in their teams. And we track that monthly, quarterly, annually. It's part of the compliance requirements. In a very structured format, we do that. But India is still very early when it comes to a comparison with the US, where US is far ahead when it comes to diversity from an investing perspective.
Himanshu, you talked, I think, early on in the conversation about onboarding the micro entrepreneurs and artisans, and do you see similar kind of objectives follow there, and fights do they have?
Yeah, I think for Etsy, it's interesting because even if you see globally, Etsy has about 5 million small micro entrepreneurs selling on the platform, out of which more than 80% of them are women. In India also, we've kind of started to say similar similar kind of numbers where the majority of the participation actually comes from women in terms of selling on the platform. And as we are going to the traditional artisans in the rural areas, semi-urban areas, we are actually working with communities who are part of these communities and in Etsy, it's interesting because in Etsy's business model, a lot of these affirmative actions are really built into it. It's really the business model itself, where a lot of these artisans come from those sort of less privileged backgrounds and a certain caste as well. So just to kind of give you an example, like we onboarded a large number of artisans in Jaipur from a community called Kagzi Mohalla. So there's a community of artisans that make products only of paper, and they are from a certain community and caste. So it's really interesting that in our work, we don't really think about it, but when we are onboarding a lot of these artisans, we end up onboarding a large percentage of artisans from these underprivileged backgrounds.
Kunjan, I mean, fintech was labeled from the start as the big equalizer, essentially, and banking the underbanked or unbanked. How does do you see similar movements in India that you see in the US?
Yeah, so like starting from even the government initiatives, right? I think one of the very unique initiatives the government of India also propagated was everybody having a banking account. And a vast majority of population in India, or at least each family or majority of the families at least have a banking account, right? Like that's the very basic grassroots of like you have a medium to receive money. There are no mediators. There is no fraud involved in the transactions. So that was one of the very foundational things the government did. And as I said, like I think digital, as you called out, fintech is a equalizer. India being a mobile first country and us, moving into mobile payments actually provides that level playing field where, everybody who has a phone can receive payments. If you can receive payments and do transactions from your phone, in a way, you're building your transaction history, so you can get loans. There are, as Vikram was saying, that there are funds which are thematic in terms of where do they invest. Similarly, there are funds which are building which are not just investing in technologies, but actually creating overall ecosystem for ensuring that the underbanks are getting the financial products. And even companies like, when we were at PayPal, we had invested in our CSR initiatives, which were particularly focused on, one, the awareness, and then second, building the products for the unbanked as well. So I think you're seeing a lot of action on that front in India for sure as well. But I think, and that's where, like, more than the government, I think technology is going to be a key enabler for us in the country.
And I see another great question from the audience, and Vikram is a perfect person to ask this. So over last number of years, we've seen a tremendous number of US funds, from small to big ones like Anderson Horowitz and Kleiner Perkins, to smaller funds that are smaller and more targeted, moving to India and investing in India. Is that healthy competition for the local money? Is that kind of uninformed investing, in your opinion, and they would not be super successful? Or is that a blessing in a sense that it will definitely just foster the ecosystem and push it further and provide more capital for growth?
Yeah, I think it's both competition as well as, from entrepreneurs' perspective, of course, is blessing. Funds like Sequoia, Accel, Lightspeed, they came into the Indian market very early on. Tiger Global entered the market very early on and benefited. So obviously, the scale of businesses actually happened primarily because of these foreign investors putting a lot of trust in the Indian entrepreneurs. And only when people started seeing the kind of scale potential which was possible, that's when you saw the Indian ecosystem started building up, right? So Flipkart, which was the first unicorn in India, was mostly invested by foreign investors. Starting with Accel and Tiger Global, and a few others came on board and grew very fast. The other thing is when the global investors come, whether it's small or large, I think there's a lot of confidence that comes along with that. Further capital, the follow-on capital, is much larger that comes from outside of India. Therefore, the risk being taken there is much larger, and therefore, the acceleration of creation of unicorns has happened primarily because of the global capital coming into India. And of course, these investors are also seeing that opportunity that if this market is going to create, let's say, another 100 unicorns in the next 3 years, you want to be part of that story, right? So it's 1.3 billion people, mostly young people, right? So the less than 30 age is about 800 million people, which is pretty sizable population. And all the young populations actually, they are on mobile phones. If you look at the high or middle income group population, that itself is about another 800 to 900 million people in the country. So it's a population which is actually spending more. It's target for a lot of consumer products which are coming up new. Lots of these IPOs which have happened in the last 1 year. Nobody was expecting the kind of valuations which these IPOs have seen, like Zomato or Nykaa, which are consumer companies. And this is all coming from the fact that the potential that the consumer markets in India can offer. The other challenge, which was historically there, was foreign investors had not seen exits happening in India. So a lot of capital going into companies, but people never saw capital coming back. In the last 3 years, substantial exits have happened. So people have seen good returns, and therefore the confidence has further increased. And that's the reason even smaller funds are now wanting to be part of this growth story.
So being cognizant of time and being cognizant of the fact that most of our attendees are young professionals who are really interested about the prospects, the business prospects of South Asia and entrepreneurship in South Asia. I was just wondering if you can close our panel by telling us why, having great successful careers in the US, you moved to India, and what led to this career inflection points, and what advice can you give to the young professionals that are listening to you now in terms of making those big decisions, because this is not a small decision. Himanshu, can I start with you? You're getting the second cold call in a row.
Yeah. So I've been back in India for about 6 years now, and I think it was really interesting because when I moved back to India, I didn't really have a lot of plans, and or I didn't really plan to move back to India, but then there were interesting opportunities that came my way. And for 6 years, I have definitely felt that, things change in India quite a lot. It's a lot more exciting. And the ecosystem, the way it has developed in the last 6 years for young professionals is incredible. The kind of opportunities that have been created. I started to work with a startup in India, and then I joined a global company and set up their India business. So it has been a sort of great experience from that point of view. I think, I have no doubt that in 10 years, this ecosystem is just going to be at a different scale altogether. This is just the very start of it. I mean, even if you think about from a macroeconomic perspective, as India gets closer to a per capita income of about $3,000-4,000, I think there's going to be this big explosion there's going to be an inflection point in the consumer markets and for businesses in India. So I think it's good to kind of work in the US for 2-3 years or few years, get that global experience in a very scaled up environment, and then leverage that and coming back to India and leverage that experience to do something in India.
Ranjan?
Yeah, I kind of echo Himanshu's comments. Honestly, for me, it was a combination of a personal and professional, decision, or both parts. I wanted to be closer to the family, of course, in India, and as Himanshu said, I think I could see that the Indian ecosystem was on that inflection, where being there, you just could learn a lot. I just felt that way. I joined PayPal again, just like Himanshu, happened by chance, had a good role. Payments were booming in India. PayPal wanted to take a leap and do something there. So almost in a big company, it was sort of like starting a startup within that. So it was an interesting journey. And, as Vikram was saying, like we have 90 unicorns, we created 44, 45 last year. I think you're going to see another 44, 45 within the next 12 to 18 months. And this journey is going to continue because we are at something like I think we have said about India's story since 2008. I remember when I was at Darden, then we used to say hey, India is at the cusp of an inflection point. But I do really feel like in that, call it 2016 onwards, we've been on this journey where fundamentally a lot of things are changing structurally. And I think this is a great time for folks to come in, really add value to the ecosystem as well and learn a lot. I think the kind of learning you're going to get in this ecosystem in 2 to 3 years is as good as what you get in a very mature ecosystem in 8, 10, 12 years. So if you use that as a learning opportunity and as a growth opportunity, this is a great platform right now for young professionals.
Vikram?
So I moved back from US very early on, 2005, after working there with IBM for almost 5 years. And at that time, hardly anyone was moving back to India. So I graduated from IIT Delhi in 93. And at that time, 95% of graduates from India, from especially IITs, used to go to the US to study further. I think if you look at the campuses now, less than 5% are actually going to the US to do any further studies or to work there. Majority of the rest of those who are graduating are actually going into entrepreneurship. And this is a very interesting trend. In fact, when I moved back to India, I actually wanted to become an entrepreneur myself. Even started a company initially in medical tourism. Of course, that was too early and ahead of its time at that time. But I think, of course, it gives you a lot of learning lessons. And of course, now if you see the current times, we're looking at Indian economy going from a $3 trillion to $5 trillion, let's say in the next 5 to 6 years or maybe 7 years. But the pace of that growth is actually very interesting. Lots of new things are happening. And there is an opportunity to really create, that one position for yourself that gets noticed very easily. So if you are really building a name for yourself in something, for solving a unique problem, I think India is the place because there's so many problems to solve, whether it is in the metros or in the rural. In fact, rural or tier 2 cities is the next wave where you'll see a lot more action happening. I think one can identify maybe just one problem and just get deep into it and start working on it. And I think you will create a huge name for yourself. So I guess depending on the choice that you want to make, of course, I would say from a career growth perspective, India is probably the best place to be in right now.
Gentlemen, I would like to thank you. We're a little bit over time. I apologize for taking more of your time. I would like to thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you so much. And we do dearly hope that you come and visit Darden more often and share your thoughts and ideas and experiences in a much broader setting. But we're grateful for you for your time today.